Next, we have Rodge Glass in conversation with Denise Mina. I cannot help but do a slight Alistair Gray impersonation every time I talk now. Rodge is senior lecturer in creative writing at the University of Strathclyde and works closely with the Alistair Gray Archive on their annual Creative Commission series, where they invite a creative practitioner to respond to Alistair's work. The selected writer for 2024 is the Scottish crime writer and playwright Denise Mina. After their conversation, there will be a book signing with Rodge and Denise. Delighted to hand over to them now to hear more. The signing will be over here. Please welcome to the stage.
I get flashbacks listening to Tam. Thank you very much.
Is this one on?
Hi.
Yeah, it's fine. Yep.
Hi. 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 Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for coming. Hi. Isn't this nice? Hi, you up there? You've got the best seats. Thanks for coming. Hi, everybody. I'm Rodge. This is Denise. We're going to chat to each other for a little bit.
It's a bit Jack and Ori, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, Alistair Gray. Not quite. Although all Alistair's stories should be read by Tam in future, I think. I'm just going to explain briefly what we're going to do for this short section, and then I'm going to hand over to Denise. So every year since Alistair died in 2019, us at the University of Strathclyde and the Alistair Gray Archive have commissioned writers to do kind of a version of what Alistair often did himself in his own work, which is to creatively respond to the work of others. It was really nice to hear the story The Star today. For those of you that haven't heard that, that was Alistair's first story that he wrote as a teenager that he thought was good. He was on holiday with his family in the Isle of Arran. He was walking, and as all of us creatives surely can relate to, he suddenly got an idea and he thought briefly, I am a genius. Right? He got an idea for a story and he squirreled away and wrote it down quickly, and it was just that 2 or 3 pages, very similar to how it was first published. I'm sure you've all got the original copy, Collins Magazine for Girls and Boys 1951, right? You're all subscribers? Anyway, long story short, so for a couple of days, Alistair thought he was a genius. And then he realized that, in fact, what he'd done was to respond with his own story to an existing story, which was a story called The Crystal Egg by H.G. Wells. Now, for anyone that searches that story out, it's really, really different. But the heart of it, like the kernel of the idea, was really similar. So Alistair could have done one of 2 things at that point. Either gone, it's not mine, I stole it, and put it in the bin. Or decided to embrace the fact that he was making new things by responding to things that had already been made. And one way of seeing many of the glorious things that Alistair did in his life, some of which surround us right now, is to see them as creative responses to things that already existed. If you look at the cover of Lanark or the pictures on the inside, if you look around the Òran Mór auditorium, look at lots of Alistair's other murals and works, some of which were remaking things he'd already made that had been knocked down, many of those were taking stories from other places, cultures, countries, nations, writers, artists, and remaking them in a Scottish way or in a Glaswegian way or in his own way. So what we do with these creative commissions is to invite people to respond creatively to Alistair however they like. We've had all sorts of lovely ones since. This time last year on Grey Day, Chitra Ramaswamy was reading from her work Rich Things, which responded to Poor Things. The year before it was Michael Pedersen, who did a brilliant ode to Alistair's Armchair. Maria Sledmere has done a book. Juana Adcock responded to Lanark. And some of these are very directly responding to Alistair's works, and some of them stand free, and they need a little bit of explaining as to what that connection might be. Anyway, so that's what we do with the Creative Commissions, and each year at Grey Day, we get a sneak peek at the new one. This is Denise. Can you believe she agreed to do one? Denise is one of our very finest writers in Scotland alive and at work. She's written loads and loads and loads of books. Recently, The Second Murderer, 3 Fires, Confidence, Rizzio, which is my favourite, which is already old news. My students are studying that on Tuesday, for any of my students in the room. And Denise has done this new commission. So I'm going to invite Denise to just introduce it briefly and give a short reading from it, and then we'll talk about Denise's connection to Alistair and how this is a response. Does that sound okay?
Brilliant.
I realise it's difficult to say no in these circumstances. Is that all right? Okay, can I ask you to give a warm welcome to Denise Mina, please?
Thank you. Well, I used to work in the Chip back in the day, right, in the 80s, right? And Alistair used to drink in there. And I was such a huge fan of his writing. I was kind of really blown away. Other people, there were quite a lot of people in there from Take the High Road. And other people who worked there were blown away by them. But I was like, that is actual Alistair Gray. And so I'd read Lanark. Now, I don't know if you remember, there's a bit in Lanark where he meets the author. And I was told by Carl McDougall that Alistair had told him, you are the author in Lanark because you are what an author should look like, right? What was amazing to me was the idea that Alistair would not think that he was what an author should look like because he gave such great author. You know, he was shambling, he was not on time, he had crumbs, Nicol will attest. He very often fell over. But he thought he gave bad author. He thought maybe he gave good artist, I think, but he didn't think he was an appropriate author. So for me, one of the things that I'm very interested in is the performance of being a writer. It's very, basically you get really troubled introverts and then shove them on a stage and ask them to perform in front of an audience, many of whom look quite stern. And
You're typical then. You're typical then.
Well, there are lots of ways. I mean, some people, I have a hairdo. That's my armour. Some people have bad tempers. That's their armour. Other people have different acts. Beckett, for example, would never, ever, ever be filmed giggling. That was his big, big thing, was he did not want to be seen as a giggly man. Brecht would never show his teeth. Byron was so self-conscious that before he went to free Greece, he went on a dramatic diet and basically died of a small cold because he was so undernourished. So presenting yourself in public is a big, big thing for writers. And we all, you meet your friends, obviously. And I'm going to be honest with you, Rodge doesn't usually look this clean. So
it's lovely to see you too.
But, but anyway, I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, come on out of that cul-de-sac. Go on.
I just thought it was really interesting that he didn't think that he was giving a good performance as a writer, and I thought, well, what did he think was a good performance as a writer? What would he imagine a good writerly performance was? And I started thinking about Brendan Behan. Now, one of the things that I love about Alistair Gray so much is those mirrors, the recognition that an artistic career, especially a writing career, is not one person doing something. It is always a collective effort. It is always, and it's not just, writers like to talk about horizontal influences. So you'll notice in literary interviews, the writer is always talking about dead white males, Shakespeare. No one's ever influenced into writing a book because they were in the dentist and they read Take a Break. That never ever, that's too horizontal, it has to be vertical. But Alistair took a really radical position, possibly from his visual arts background, which was he was very open to the horizontal, and he acknowledged that the people that put up the scaffolding were as much a part of this artwork as he was. And that if it was not for the people who put up the scaffolding, he could not have done his work. And anyway, so it got me thinking about Brendan Behan, who for my family is like a real touchstone. But I realise now no one remembers Brendan Behan. Very few people remember Brendan Behan. Can I talk a bit about Brendan Behan?
Please do.
Okay, right.
As long as you're not going to say anything about my appearance, do what you like.
Right, okay. Brendan Behan was the ultimate writer-performer. He got so good at it, he couldn't write anymore. All he could do was perform the social acts of being a writer. And, we tend to, you can't cash that in. You can't print that in the New Yorker. So we talk about it as if it doesn't matter. But actually, his performance was amazing. And he basically died of alcoholism and diabetes at 41. and is very much forgotten. But he was a wild man, and if you look at him, he looks like, I wish Alistair had painted him, because it's like a tiny wee face on a big field of a head. He's got a massive, massive head, and all his features are clustered round. He looks like the boy David. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but anyway. So he gave great writer, Brendan Behan, and he took it to America. He was like a professional Irishman. He was always coming out with these bon mots. He said things like, in 1939, actually, he was very involved in Republican politics. In 1939, as a 16-year-old, without the authorization of the IRA, he travelled to Liverpool docks with a suitcase full of explosives and was arrested. And about 2 weeks after he got out of prison, he was arrested again for pulling a gun on 2 Gardaí. And he said later in his writing, and he wrote in Gaelic, and he wrote poetry and plays and all sorts of things. And he said, "I've never seen a situation so dismal that it couldn't be made worse by the appearance of a policeman." He's always coming out with these amazing bon mots. He said, if it was raining soup, the Irish would go out with forks. He was amazing, and he would just throw these out as if they didn't matter. But actually, very much like Alistair's delivery. That was brilliant of Alistair's delivery, the way he spoke. He spoke as if he had thought about what he was going to say, instead of just burbling like me now. But he did speak as if everything felt declamatory. And I think that's because you're a shy person, and it is effortful to form a sentence. Do you know what I mean? You're not just talking as you dance out of the door so that you don't get the sack because the manageress didn't get a chance to talk to you, which is very much my style of speech. But anyway, I'm going to read you a wee bit about Brendan Behan, but this story is really all about Brendan Behan being in a bar. And when I worked in the Chip and I served Alistair, a lot of people would come up and talk to him, and they were very complimentary to him, and it made him quite uncomfortable. I think Nicole will attest to that. He didn't really like people sucking up to him. Do you know what I mean? He really didn't like that at all, and he was always pointing out the fact that he was part of a collective, and actually doing artworks to show that he was part of a collective. Brendan Behan says, "I am a drinker with a writing problem." He's very quotable. He's known for his public persona. Bren has actually heard quotes by himself that he never uttered. His own friends attribute lines to him that he knows he never said. He knows he didn't, not even if he was blacked out, because the intonation is not quite right. Sometimes punchlines are wrongly filed in the middle of a line. He doesn't talk like that, but he's too tired to curate his own archive. Anyway, his performance note is insouciance. Spoken words have a life of their own, like poems passed by ear. He drops these glories off the cuff, as if they are off the cuff, but they are his best work, and they are his work. The spoken word matters to him as much as the written. He said, "They took away our land, our language, and our religion, but they could never harness our tongues." He takes time to work these lines, rolling an observation around his head, enjoying the coupling of the words. And then he shapes them in his mind, back and forth, hand to hand, like wet clay, forming it. Then he holsters the quip, loaded, safety off, waiting for just the right target to come through the saloon doors. He self-publishes in proclamations. This is another bit, and it's kind of an observation about Alistair being in the Chip. Brendan is a tourist attraction. People find out where he's drinking, and they come and they buy him drink, and they get him to sign fag packets. They tell him how they know of him. Unbidden, they tell him what they think of him. "Guess who I met," they say later. "Guess what he said." Bren saves his best for interviews now. At least they quote him verbatim. "What's a crook," he says, "if only a businessman with no shop?" Because Brendan's true greatness is not in writing anymore. Now it's the performance of being an author. This is an ephemeral skill. You can't sell tickets. It's uncommodifiable and therefore not valued. but it's actually more rare than fairly good writing, which can be quite mechanical and can occasionally be learned. It is this social performance of genius that Bren excels at. Lucia Rigari says, "What is genius but a social performance of specialness? An angry white man isolated by the press of specialness, claiming to have access to bodies of knowledge most of us ordinary people are too normal to grasp. These authors are priests. They are conduits of the Godhead through whom we mortals may hear distant songs murmured." And many think Bren has found the hidden door to literary transcendence inside the dark tunnel of drink because they can't go in there. So it must be in there, because they've been looking for this door, and sure, he's no better than them. Bren may have glimpsed the door of genius, but he wasn't in the tunnel. In fact, his drinking is dragging him back from the light, backwards and away, dragging him by the heels, face down, over gravel. I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much. It's awesome. Some brilliant one-liners. Let's talk just a little bit about the process of making the commission. So you could have done anything, right? And you met Alistair, as many people in the room will have known him in one capacity or another. You can take any way in. And I'm just really conscious that in lots of your books, graphic novels, all sorts of your work is a response of some kind to either an existing story or a new version of a story or something afresh. So 2 questions really. First of all, how do you usually go about finding your way in? And secondly, how did you do it for this?
Well, I tried to do something that didn't work. I really love Alistair's writing. And that really is, I've read almost everything he's ever written. And Unlikely Stories mostly is one of my favourite things ever. So I loved 5 Letters from an Eastern Empire. I don't know if people in the room have read that, but for me, that's really just outstanding. And so I wanted to write something that was letters. And I wanted to write an epistolary thing, and it was going to be 5 letters from contraband camp. I'm frightened to start talking about the American Civil War because I don't know if I'll be able to stop. So I'll maybe just leave it there, but it didn't work.
Oh, I'll stop you.
Will you?
Give us a couple of headlines.
All right, okay. So contraband camp, I think Alistair, 5 letters is really about becoming an artist. It's about... how do you become an artist? How can you formalise the process of becoming an artist? I think he didn't really believe himself as an artist at the time that he wrote it, and because it's quite an early work. And so contraband camp was a refugee camp during the American Civil War. Slaves ran off to the Union lines and formed camps there. And the Confederacy asked the Union soldiers for the slaves back. And they said, under the Fugitive Slave Act, you have to give us back this property. And the Union soldiers said, but that's an American law, and you said you're not in America anymore. So I can't swear because there's children here, but you're not getting them back. That's essentially what's it. So these camps became really amazing places, and they were very like the city in 5 Letters from an Eastern Empire, because what everybody wanted to do was what had been against the law while they were enslaved, and that was to learn to read. So they had classrooms with 1,000 people in them, and everybody just wanted to learn how to read because this is what had been forbidden to everybody. And actually some people used to, on the black market, they would pay poor whites to teach them how to read. And I just thought that was such a lovely kind of, it was a very Alistair scenario. But
so what did you try to do with it?
Well, okay, first of all, I read a lot of letters from contraband camp. There was a lot of nice white Quaker ladies coming to do it. And I wanted to write about being a white saviour. But there were so many problems with it. First of all, I realised I am an old white lady. And also then I thought, well, maybe you could actually write about white saviorism. But I couldn't even find the language that was used at that time for enslaved people. You couldn't use now. It would sound cod. It would sound... So I was talking to Sophie Hannah about it, and I think we're going to do something together about it. But I just don't feel... It just felt it was so complicated. And I thought, and then you had to read it out, which is and I can feel a lot of you losing the will to live.
So, I'm kind of happy to hear that he's tried something that didn't work.
Yeah.
Because writing is experimentation, right? And almost everything that Alistair made himself was multiple versions of things and made and remade and recycled and tried again. I always think of the painting of his son Andrew that was, was a sketch when he was 9 years old, and then by the time Andrew was in his late 40s, Alistair coloured it in. So we're all continually looking for ways into stories. And the first thing doesn't always work, right?
Yeah.
So thank God for Brendan being. So what made you think of performance then? And, the performance of being an author?
It was just that, it was very striking at the time that Alistair would think he wasn't good copy as a writer. That he wasn't doing it right because he wasn't wearing a safari suit. I don't know if you knew Carl, but
Yes,
Carl
I
was
did,
quite
yeah.
put together. Do you know what I mean? And Alistair, what a great performance as a writer. He's he's very his mind's on higher things all the time, and you never forgot that you met him, did you? Do you know what I mean? And he's very particularly himself, but I think he was very critical of his own presentation publicly, which, now we think of him as Alistair Gray, but he was a young man then, and so he was like a young man who, there were a lot of things he couldn't cope with, like, time being chronological and money. You know what I mean? And, he found things quite difficult, but he is now a prototype of being a writer. Do you know what I mean? He is now like he will be Brendan Behan for a next generation. People will be standing backstage breaking up custard creams on their jersey before they come out on stage.
Well, I'm glad that we ended up at custard creams, even if we started somewhere
Always.
radically different. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll continue this conversation, of course. To be clear, I'm not signing books, although once upon a time when I had beautiful flowing hair down to my shoulders, I did write a biography of Alistair Gray. But I'm not signing books just now.
Sign some of my books. Come on, sign some.
Anyway, so can I ask you to warmly thank Denise Mina one more
you so
time?
much.
And then we'll have a book signing straight after. Thank you so much.